This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software like PDF Pen for Mac, PDF Pen Pro for Mac, PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander for Mac, and Text Expander for iPhone and iPad. Learn more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. And by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like MacVoices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have another one of our friends back again. It seems like all our friends are always really busy, bringing out books, writing articles, publishing websites. I love it. I love to be around productive people that aren't just opining all the time, but actually giving you information that you can use. This time, Ms. Shelly Brisbin is back, and the information you can use that she is giving you is the 4th edition of iOS Accessibility for All. Shelly, it's great to have you as always. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Chuck. Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to be on Mac Voices.
Well, I'm excited to have you back. I have to say, I thought it was very nice of Apple to give you such a big promotion by putting accessibility right up front in the September, right? Just in time for the book, shall we?
If they had only put my URL up, that would have made it all perfect. But, I'll take the plugs wherever I can get them.
Yeah, I thought it was both interesting and terrific that they made a bigger deal out of accessibility. I mean, yes, I know it was at the front of the announcement, but at the same time, just anything that makes the stage at an Apple event is a pretty big deal. How did you feel about that before we get into some of the book?
Sure. Well, I think the best part about it was that you actually saw people using the accessibility features of the devices in a really active way. It's sort of dry to say, there's a screen reader and here's how you can use the camera or here's how you can edit video. But if you actually see somebody doing it, it really makes an impact on people. So that part I loved. The couple beefs I have were that when they announced the updated accessibility website, I wish that Tim had taken time to say the URL just for folks out there who don't have vision. And that URL is apple.com/accessibility. And they've added a lot of information about the verticals in accessibility, so how deaf and blind and folks with motor disabilities can use Apple accessibility. And also there's a lot of new stuff about accessories and other tools that you can use along with the Apple products, which I think will also help people go, oh yeah, accessibility, that's how that interacts with my life. So that's great. My other real beef is that I think it would be great if Apple would take the next step from promoting the great work they do in accessibility to occasionally in the keynote, even if it's just a sentence or a clause at the end of a sentence, saying, we have this touch bar, it's really tremendous, it's really great, and it's voiceover compatible. That's all I would ask. And so that's kind of my next step feedback. If I were giving them notes, because clearly Apple's going to take the notes from me, that's what I would ask, is that they occasionally, even if they can't demo it, take a little time to mention that a new feature or a new product has accessibility features. That would certainly help those of us who are watching coverage closely feel excited about the new products.
Yeah, it's such an important thing. And I guess the comeback would be that they can't address every single audience out there, but at the same time, the accessibility audience is huge. And we've talked about this before, that you just identified the accessibility audience in several ways, but I think that the audience is a lot larger for people that may not identify with some of those things and as having some of those conditions, characteristics. I'm not quite sure what the right word is.
There are a lot of people who age into accessibility, people whose eyesight as a course of normal aging deteriorates, or people who develop macular degeneration later in life. And so there are a lot of people, and the joke I always make about accessibility features is if you ever see a story that says 10 secret features in iOS, it's guaranteed that half of them take you into the accessibility pane to do something you didn't know you could do, even if you don't have a disability.
Yeah. And that's kind of my point, that just because you may not identify in that as part of that community doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't or wouldn't benefit from the features that are there.
Right.
So with that very broad introduction, This is the fourth edition of this book, and the obvious question is, what's new with it, and what kind of things do you guide people through?
I do a new edition of the book for each edition of iOS. And so I did 7, 8, 9, and now iOS 10. And so the first logical thing to do was to just update the entire book for iOS 10. And so I've done that. There are a lot of new features, big and small, in iOS 10 for mainstream users. And there are some accessibility features that have been either tweaked a little bit or modified, in some cases moved around. And then there are some things that are some fairly new. For example, under low vision, there are a couple of new interesting options. There's something called the magnifier that a lot of people actually might have seen, which turns your camera into a magnification device so you can read those small labels or serial numbers on the back of appliances. Or if you're a person with low vision, you might actually use it to read your bills or other mail that you get. And you have the ability not only to increase the font, not the font size, but increase the magnification of the screen using a slider. But there are color filters so that if you're colorblind, you can change the color scheme from black on white, white background, black text, to blue on white, or whatever. There's several different color filter settings, and those are tuned toward different kinds of color blindness. So that's a pretty cool feature. Another thing that's done in VoiceOver just keeps getting incrementally better. That's the screen reader that allows a blind user to use alternate gestures to control iOS. And there is now a pronunciation editor. So if you have a hard to pronounce name that the voice in iOS just doesn't ever get right, you can in fact tune that so that you will hear, for example, my husband has a name with 4 syllables in it, and VoiceOver actually usually does a pretty good job, but I did have it give a little help to make sure that it did a perfect job pronouncing his name, so that's kind of fun. And then one other one I'll quickly highlight is typing feedback. So I don't use VoiceOver on a daily basis in my life. I have enough vision that I work visually with my iDevices, but sometimes when I'm typing a text message and maybe I'm outside or in a bright environment where I'm having a little difficulty seeing, there's a feature called typing feedback that as I complete a word will speak the word back to me. So I'll have some current feedback about whether I'm typing the thing I think I'm typing. And I turn that off, or I turn it on a individual occasion basis. But those are some. There are some others, but I think I would overall say that the iOS 10 update for accessibility was incremental, but it was a good update, and there have been some attempts to reorganize accessibility features in ways that will make them more accessible, if you will, for people finding the tools that they need. Because, as you know, with iOS, there's a lot of nesting in those menus, and sometimes you have to go 3 or 4 levels deep to find everything you want. So I think Apple's trying to structure them a little more easy ways.
That's particularly interesting to me, simply because with all the settings, there's so many settings, and Apple does try to group things logically, but sometimes you do feel like you just have to step down a lot.
Oh yeah.
Does it make more sense to just make one long list and then have fine tuning under each item, or is it better to try to categorize, then subcategorize, then subcategorize, and keep on going?
I don't know. I think there's disagreement on this one. I am a creature of outlines. I like the idea that you have a nested structure. Also, keep in mind that you can activate some settings with Siri, so I can say that word that you don't want to say, but I can say, "Oh, won't you please activate VoiceOver for me?" And she will. And something a lot of people probably don't know, but that many people could use, is you can say, "Make the screen brighter, make the screen dimmer." And not all of those settings are available that way, but a fair number of the ones that you would use most often are. And also, of course, there's a search bar, so you can find some of the settings. But I know people who really don't like the way Apple has done it. And sometimes the naming conventions are hard. There's a settings category now called display accommodation that sounds like something right out of a government accessibility manual. I don't know what it means exactly, but what it actually means is changing some of the visual aspects of the display based on whether you're colorblind or need the screen lighter or darker or more contrast. And so some of those settings are underneath that heading. And that's just an example of one that's a little counterintuitive. But overall, I think they've now separated out increased contrast into a separate couple of toggles. And I remember when those features first came out, those low vision features after iOS 7, and there would be a settings screen with just one item on it. And I would look at that big blank screen and I'd say, I know they're going to put more things there. I know it. And they have done. So
I want to make sure I don't lose this too. On looking for settings, you do have the ability to search for settings, and that usually includes a Siri search. So maybe you wouldn't say, and I too want to be careful here. You're not necessarily going to be say, hey, you turn this on or turn this off, but you definitely can say, hey, find accessibility setting X, and it's got to have a pretty decent shot of finding it.
Yeah, you can actually say turn on voiceover, and I use that one all the time.
Right.
And you can say turn on invert colors, which is another one I use. I have a list in chapter 5 of the book under which settings you can.
I should have known.
It's a really long. In fact, the sample chapter that I give away for free is chapter 5. So if people want to see the long list of Siri commands, including a set of them for how to get into settings, I invite you to go have a look at that.
Good. So this is always a dangerous thing to ask, but what else does Apple need to do? And I realize by saying that it sounds like, oh, Apple's finished. It's fixed accessibility. No, that's not the case,
right.
And I don't believe that. But so where should they go from here? What would you like to see them focus their attention on and their resources on going forward from an accessibility standpoint?
It's hard to think of big things. I mean, they've really addressed most of. I can't say anymore. Well, there's no switch control. There's no low vision settings because all those things exist, and so you end up answering questions like that by saying things that sound fairly small bore. But if you're using these settings every day, they can be important. For example, because low vision settings are so numerous, I would actually like to have a macro or some sort of saved setting option where I can take my settings from one device to another. And, I think that would be groovy, but that's, like I say, a fairly small bore thing that I want, and that's going to be more applicable to people who use a group of settings, whereas, I guess a voiceover user might have some similar needs for that. They might want to choose a particular voice. They might want to control the speed of the voice feedback that they get. So just macro settings would be great. Another thing would be a true dark mode. So you can invert colors so that you see, in my case, a dark background and light text, which is easier for me to read, but that means that my images are always negative, so I have to reverse them in order to see the smiling faces in the images on web pages I'm looking at or the pictures that my camera takes. So I'd like a true dark mode. That would also make it easier for app developers to design interfaces that worked aesthetically for what they're doing, but that if they supported the dark mode accessibility hooks, then I, as a user who wants a dark background and light text, wouldn't have to keep flipping back and forth because, say, the menu is light and the content of the screen is dark or that sort of thing. That's what a true dark mode would give you.
So right now we're talking about iOS 10, and and that's the operating system. How are developers doing? How's Apple doing in giving developers the tools to implement some of these changes and better functions for accessibility? And how are the vendors doing in actually accomplishing it?
Apple provides really good hooks as well as really good information in their developer libraries. One of the things that they do that's most interesting, and I encourage anybody who goes to WWDC to take advantage of this, they always have multiple accessibility sessions on each platform. So, for example, if I go to the iOS accessibility setting, not only will they tick off what's new in iOS 10, but they usually do creation of an app right there in real time, or there may be an existing app and they show how a developer can add accessibility features to it. And that's a great way. Again, seeing is better than telling, right? Showing better than telling. A developer says, oh, that's all I have to do to make my navigation app or my writing app or my communication app accessible. All I have to do is make these calls. This is where I can look for information to help me do it. So that's one of and those videos are available online after the fact too. So even if you don't go to WWDC, you can take advantage of those. As far as how developers are doing, it's always individual. Many developers do a great job. A lot of them do. There are every once in a while you will encounter an app or a developer who just doesn't get it and who either needs to hear from their users or for whatever reason doesn't believe that they have users that rely on accessibility features. And a lot of people in the accessibility community have been advised how to better communicate with developers, and often that gets results, especially in iOS where you have a lot of developers that are individuals or very small companies. Even though accessibility might, if they haven't implemented it already, might take a little bit of time to add. Small developers particularly are very receptive and often are flattered that people are interested enough in their app to say, you know what, I'd like to use your Twitter app or your writing app as opposed to somebody else's. And if you would add voiceover support, I'd be able to do that. And then unfortunately, there are occasions where a developer just doesn't feel like they have the time or the resources and they don't respond. But that's definitely the minority. So I would say that it continues to get better, but I do think that people who have accessibility needs should absolutely vote with their dollars and attention and choose those apps that do a great job of supporting accessibility. And frankly, don't settle, because you really don't have to in most product categories.
Yeah, and that's something that's relatively new and very much a welcome change. That I mean, yeah, you're voting with your dollars and with your feet, but at the same time, it only makes sense that you're going to purchase a product that works for you. And if product X works for you and product Y doesn't, well, of course you're going to buy product X, even though it might not be the one that everybody uses. It's got to work for you.
Well, and the word gets around in the accessibility community. So if you ask 5 or 10 blind people what their favorite Twitter client is, they might not all say the same one, but a good percentage of them will say the same one because they know that there is accessibility support in that one or those several. And sites like appleviz.com have created Hall of Fame categories for apps and for developers who have done a great job consistently with accessibility. So it's absolutely possible to become a hero developer by creating accessibility hooks in your app. And so, that's out there, and that's an opportunity for a developer to be able to have something to brag on in their marketing. They might not even have intended to create an accessible product, but if they have, and then if they respond to feedback they get from users, if they go that little extra step, they will absolutely be a hero to people who use accessibility and want to use their products.
And speaking from a strictly business standpoint, it's just good business because it means that there's yet one more audience that is going to not just potentially buy your product, but evangelize your product for you.
Absolutely.
So, jump on it, folks. Shelly, how about iPhone versus iPad? For some reason, I always feel like these discussions that you and I have tend toward the iPhone, and that I don't know why, but is there any significant accessibility difference between the iPhone and the iPad?
It's funny because early on, the iPad had some accessibility challenges, and part of it was, and I'm going to speak from a voiceover perspective first, but part of it was that the iPad's multi-column layout meant that you didn't access parts of the screen quite in the same way that you do with Vision. But that has mostly been cleared up. I mean, most of the interfaces have adapted to the way you need to. Well, okay, let me start again. Let me say, most users have figured out what they need to do in terms of understanding the iPad screen, and most developers have figured out ways to make what they do on the iPad intuitive. Also, obviously, more people have used iPads and they're comfortable with it. And one of the things I do in the book, not to do my own marketing here, but one of the things I do in the book is I describe differences in interfaces, and I describe not only like how the voiceover gestures differ for different interfaces, but I just say this is visually what people see. And I think that helps folks who are blind to get spatial awareness. And spatial awareness is absolutely a thing for somebody without vision, just as it is for somebody with vision. And all of the features on the iPad that have been introduced recently, like split view and slide over, those are absolutely voiceover accessible. And I know several people who are writers and developers who happen to be blind who love their iPads and love the ability to have writing on one side of the screen and reading matter on the other side of the screen, or however they choose to divide it. And obviously, for some low vision people, the big iPad Pros are a benefit. For other low vision people like me, I tend to get lost in the screen a little bit. I don't really want an enormous iPad Pro, but it's worth pointing out that for some people, especially who need the fonts quite large, a big iPad Pro might be just the ticket. And the last thing I would say is, while all of that has been from a blindness perspective, it's very important to point out that the iPad in education for a lot of kids, and especially kids with accessibility needs, is absolutely a great tool, because kids might have iPads at home and not even realize that they have an accessible device. But if they go to school and use an iPad, or if their teacher's trained to use an iPad, then that kid can go home and do his work or do his research on an iPad. And, that's such an amazing ability to be able to navigate the waters of accessible devices. And you may have a parent that has no clue how to use VoiceOver, but the kid has learned how to use VoiceOver in a classroom environment, and now you can hand them your iPad and they can be as productive as anybody else. So that's the advantage the iPad has offered to a lot of students.
Smile and their amazing suite of productivity software are sponsoring today's edition of MacVoices. Smile helps you get more done with PDF Pen, available in various flavors for Mac and iOS, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iOS, and Text Expander for Mac and iOS. Get all the details at smilesoftware.com. PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro are the choice for editing and manipulating PDFs on your Mac. With PDF Pen, you can do things that you would expect with a PDF editor: mark up PDFs, sign and fill out forms, add and edit images to PDF documents, create tables of contents, and securely redact information so it can't be read. You can also do some things you might not expect. Things like add file and audio attachments to your PDFs, digitally sign your documents with self-signed certificates, and export your PDFs to Microsoft Word for further editing or manipulation. You know those PDFs you received that were created by a scanner in someone's office? You can run optical character recognition on them to turn them into text that is fully editable. PDF Pen Pro adds the ability to create links from URLs, create PDF portfolios, export to Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint, add and edit permissions, and much more. With all that, Smile is not sitting on their laurels. PDF Pen 8.2 was recently released with the ability to sync all windows and tabbed windows on macOS Sierra. That enhances PDF Pen's support of cloud syncing using either iCloud, if you bought through the iOS App Store, or Dropbox, no matter where you purchased. I'm betting that pretty much anything you want or need to do with PDFs can be done with PDF Pen. But you need to find out for yourself. Visit smilesoftware.com right now to download a trial version of PDF Pen, check it out, and decide if PDF Pen suits your needs, or if the extra features of PDF Pen Pro are for you. No matter which version you select, you're on your way to being more productive. And don't forget about PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, the version that brings some of the most frequently used PDF editing capabilities to iOS. That's PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, and PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, all from Smile, the makers of world-class software. Smile is the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices, and I appreciate them just as much as you do. Thank you, Smile. I probably can go and look this up in your book, but I'm going to be lazy. So
you're not going to ask me which gesture does what, because I'm going to.
No. But I will ask you this: you said split screen and slide over and all that are shoot. Sorry,
They're accessible with VoiceOver.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say. So, are you telling me that I can say, and I'm not going to say it, but hey, you turn on slide over or turn on split screen?
Well, no, actually, you would be doing that within VoiceOver. So once VoiceOver is enabled, you would use a gesture. So just really quickly for folks who aren't familiar with VoiceOver, VoiceOver is a gesturing system that uses gestures that are slightly different than what you otherwise would. So, for example, if you tap to open an app in VoiceOver, you would double tap. And there are modifications to flicks and double flick, double taps and various other gestures that allow you, for example, to open up the split view app switcher and choose the app that you want, and then change the size of the border between the parts of the window. So all that stuff is just done with alternative gestures.
Okay, all right. How about the iPhone's cameras? Do they come the iPhone or the iPads? I gotta quit just being biased on one device. Are they coming into play in accessibility at all?
Well, absolutely. And if you watch the Apple accessibility video from the town hall, you saw a blind man taking photographs with a camera. And that's because with VoiceOver on, the camera will identify faces. It will also identify whether an image appears to be blurry or well lit. And even after the fact. So if you have VoiceOver on, you can tap. I like to tap on an image that I've taken with VoiceOver on, and it says blurry, well lit. It's like, I didn't even really ask for that evaluation, but thanks for that. And yeah, my cats are blurry and well lit a lot, but that's my problem as a bad photographer. The thing that I haven't had a chance to do is look at an iPhone 7 Plus. I'm trying to convince myself that that would be a good investment so that I could learn about how the fancy camera interacts with accessibility. But the camera has always been a tool for accessibility in the sense of, as we talked about with the magnifier, allowing you to take images and magnify them so that you can see them more easily if you have some vision, or if you're blind, using it for OCR scanning of various kinds. There are a number of apps, the scanning apps that work great with VoiceOver, that are general purpose scanning apps that anyone might use. And then there are a few special purpose apps out there that are designed to do long form OCR scanning with VoiceOver. KNFB Reader is one that are specifically designed for the blind. And so obviously the camera plays a big role in making that possible. And the camera is such a great tool. And on the iPad, it's not particularly different in the iPad. I think it probably is more possible to capture more OCR with the iPad, but I think people probably use the phone just because it's a little easier to hold in one place while you're trying to scan something.
Yeah. It's sometimes I think it's difficult for the folks that are not taking advantage of some of these capabilities in the phone to appreciate just what's there. It's almost like the huge variety of apps. You have to train yourself that, yeah, this is a capability, and if it benefits me, I should use it. But they have to know that those capabilities are there first.
Right. And I think also app developers, both those who are creating tools specifically for disabled users and those who have just created great apps, will help with that as well. Like I say, there's scanning apps out there. There are apps that there's a goggles app whose focus is basically reading signage at some distance. There's an app called Light Detector, which will look around your room and tell you if there's any lights. So if you don't have vision and you want to know whether your light's on or off, I can't remember the name of it, but there's one really clever app that allows you to set your iPhone, for example, in your cube facing outward, and it's a motion detector. So if somebody's approaching you, it will let you know, and you can turn around and greet them. I'm trying to remember the name. It's in chapter 9 of the book, but I can't remember the name of it. It's a pretty old app, but it's a really clever idea.
See, yeah, those are the kind of things that, somebody sat down and said, we have these capabilities. What could we do with it to benefit this particular audience? And some of those, that seems like almost an obvious thing, but I wouldn't have thought of it, so.
Well, but see, that's the thing about the iOS platform and the idea that you can develop apps that do one thing and one thing really well. Maybe it's not this way anymore, but the perception I've always had of desktop software is that people feel like they need to create more of a Swiss Army tool that does a lot of things and has a lot of toolbars and a lot of functions. But if you're an app developer, there's nothing wrong with making an app that just magnifies the screen, or just provides a light, or just reads signs that are 20 feet away, or just does navigation that's transit oriented and has a voice so that a blind person can tell where the bus stop is in relation to where they are in the bus right now. So, it seems like it's an easier thing for a mobile app developer to do. And it's also just the custom on mobile devices that it's perfectly reasonable. And you charge $1 for it, and there's not a lot of risk if you buy it and it isn't quite what you want. There's probably another one out there that'll be right for you.
You must be reading my script, because it was kind of where I wanted to go. I wanted to ask you for a comparison of the iOS experience and the desktop Mac OS experience. Sure. And I realize that's beyond the scope of the book, but it seems like inevitably you and I always end up talking about the iOS options here. How's the Mac doing?
I think the Mac is great. I think there are probably a few more things that people might like. I want to say, first of all, that in general, you can do the things on a Mac that you can do in iOS with accessibility. In fact, some of the features for switch control for people with motor disabilities have been enhanced on the Mac. Dwell control, which allows head-mounted switch devices, now support the Mac. That's what you saw in the video in the Apple presentation. That's a relatively new thing. And the Mac can connect to Braille displays just like iOS can. Now the Mac has Siri, so you have some of the command-type features that iOS does. There are a few things that people want. Again, a dark mode would be nice. And the ability to globally change the size of fonts. A lot of people do that in an ad hoc way by messing around with the resolution of their screen, but I wouldn't recommend that. The Mac is an absolutely usable, accessible platform. VoiceOver is if anything, more mature on the Mac and a little easier to operate because it's all keyboard shortcut based. I think that there are perhaps fewer resources for people who are trying to learn VoiceOver than there are on the Mac than there are in iOS, because sometimes they haven't been updated. But I think it's a good platform. Used to, the Mac had a huge advantage because screen readers on the Windows platform were things you had to purchase. They were not part of the operating system. They still aren't, but there are some free or inexpensive screen reader options out there for Windows, but there are still very expensive ones. So that was a huge advantage for the Mac. And if it's still an advantage for the Mac if you are individually choosing your own computer. If you're in a work environment or in a government purchase situation where you don't get to choose your computer, the Mac may not have that much of an advantage. But there are also accessibility add-ons for the Mac. There's a tool called Zoom Text that was ported from Windows to the Mac that adds some functionality to the Zoom that's built into iOS. So there are ways to use the Mac it's just as accessible as iOS, certainly, and also just as accessible as Windows, except that you have the same problem on the Mac that you do in any platform where there are individual apps that are not accessible to VoiceOver. And sadly, some of them are my favorite apps. And I think, again, it's a little easier to get iOS developers to respond to those requests than it is Mac developers sometimes, just because of the ease of development in those environments. And also, I think people probably feel like there are more iOS users out there, individual iOS users who would be willing to buy their products. But still, you can absolutely do everything you want to with a Mac as long as you don't insist on using a particular app that might not be accessible.
Okay, you did it again. You're reading my script.
I just thought I was droning on like I do.
No. It's really interesting. I'm not sure whether your mind works like mine or mine works like yours. Either one is scary.
It's scary, Chuck. Very scary.
Yeah. But how is Apple holding up? And you can answer this across the board, or iOS or Mac, or however you want to. But how are they holding up in relation to the other platforms and the competition? Is Android doing anything for accessibility? Is Windows doing anything for accessibility?
I think both Android and Windows platforms are improving significantly, and a lot of that is because of Apple's lead. And some of their motivation is the desire to be compatible in terms of meeting government requirements and in terms of meeting the needs of businesses that have accessibility goals as well. And they took in some cases, they did take a look at what Apple did and said, hey, we better catch up. And in other cases, the time is just right. I think Apple still maintains a lead overall, especially in mobile. I don't know that you could say Apple is ahead of Windows per se, but I think you can say that given a choice between a Mac and a Windows platform, all things being equal, there's no reason not to choose a Mac, again, if you have that individual choice. Android is making great strides. Every Android operating system, especially since KitKat, has included improved accessibility. There is a screen reader called TalkBack that's included with Android. The low vision stuff kind of took a while to take off, and there's some variances between Samsung devices and just mainstream Android. But I know a lot of very happy Android users who use all the accessibility tools. And just like Apple and Windows users who do not have disabilities, Apple and Android users who do not have disabilities, Apple and Android users with disabilities like to fight about their platforms, just like anybody else does. Mine's better. No, mine's better.
Yeah, we do it here, and I don't know why. At the end of the day, it's all about actually getting things done, and instead of some kind of platform superiority. But everybody likes to think that they've made the right choice.
I should add that Microsoft, actually, let me give them credit, because they've been doing a little bit of what I would like to see Apple do and what Apple has done. They opened their recent announcements with an accessibility video as well. They did something else really interesting. They followed that up with a big summit that included a lot of opinion leaders and tech folks that are from blindness organizations. And so they sat them around in a room and asked basically, what do you need? Where are the problems in both Microsoft's platform, Windows operating system and in Office? And I think, to be fair to Apple, the difference between what Microsoft did and what Apple did is that Microsoft let people talk about it. And I know those sorts of things happen and that Apple users have the opportunity to contribute to accessibility. But I think Microsoft is not only improving their accessibility, but they're also doing a great job of communicating about it right now. And so I feel like I want to give them credit. I'm not going to jump ship anytime soon, but I feel like a rising tide lifts all boats. And as long as those platforms are either competing with each other or feeling like there's something somebody's doing that they're not doing, that benefits everybody.
Yeah, great point. Great point. I want to wrap up by asking one more question about Siri. For accessibility users, obviously Siri has a lot of advantages. Is there anything to turn on with Siri that gives you more capabilities or accessibility only capabilities? Or is it just pretty much Siri is Siri and you use it the way that you might use it differently than someone that's not in the accessibility community does, but you still get that basic tool set?
It's pretty much the same. I mean, with iOS, beginning in iOS 9 and more so with iOS 10, there are some more voices. So some of the voices that people are familiar with from the Mac have come to Siri, and that's exciting. It was a big deal when Alex came to iOS in iOS 8, and now Siri obviously is available on the Mac, and some of those voices are over on iOS that were only on the Mac, and that's kind of groovy. As far as what Siri actually does, there's not a lot that's specific to accessibility. I do want to point out that some of the things that Siri can now do with HomeKit will have accessibility benefits because people who either physically can't get to network controlled devices or who are blind and don't know what the status of their lights are, for example, could use Siri to communicate with those devices. And I'll point out, too, that some of the other voice assistants out there in the market are gaining a lot of adherence in the blindness community specifically and in other accessibility communities, too. So there is kind of an interesting battle between Amazon, Google, and Apple in terms of the accessibility, in terms of those voice assistants in general. And so folks with accessibility needs are saying, well, which one of these, and they feel like they have the choice, which one of these tools is going to meet my needs? And if Apple comes out with a hardware device that supports Siri in some way, I think you're going to find a lot of people comparing those three head to head. And that's only good for all the platforms again.
So it sounds like that across the board, but naturally we're focused on Apple, that the accessibility community is getting more access to all the features of their devices, not less. And that's absolutely a good thing.
Yeah, I think the limitations tend to be very specific. I won't say they're minor because if the worst bug in the world is the bug that you're experiencing, and you can find plenty of people that are having difficulty with something, and there are sometimes showstopper bugs. Sometimes there are bugs that prevent you from using a particular device, that prevent you from using a particular app in the way that you would like to, and that's the most important bug in the world to you at that moment. But the progress is forward, and I think the best thing that's happening right now is that people in the accessibility community have more and better language with which to address both the developers of operating systems and the developers of individual apps to say, this is a thing we need, this is a thing we use. And as critical as I can sometimes be of Apple and Microsoft doing what amount to somewhat warm and fuzzy accessibility videos, if there are developers out there in the audience who see that and go, hey, I bet I could make a tool accessible that I already have, or I could build a new thing that's accessible, then I should just eat my words because that will have accomplished its desired result.
So people want to have more information on accessibility. You've got these great capabilities. Now you've got the 4th edition of Shelly's book. And so that's where you need to go to get started if you're not already into this. Shelly, tell us about the availability of the book and all the details, please.
You can find the book at iosaccessbook.com, and that is where you can buy the book. You can buy it from me, or you can buy it from the iBook store. The buttons are on the site. You can also download the free sample chapter 5, which is all about Siri. I also have the full table of contents if you're not sure you want the book, but you can dig in and figure out whether it addresses your particular accessibility need. The book is organized by accessibility type. So there's a chapter about blindness, a chapter about low vision tools, a chapter about motor disabilities, and so on. And then the back of the book has chapters about the apps that Apple includes with iOS. And then the final chapter is all about third-party apps. So I've got more than 100 third-party apps that I recommend in there. And that's where you can get the book, or you can just go search for it directly on the iBook store. But if you buy it from me, I get a couple more shekels. So do whatever you like, but please come over. I've got plenty of them. They're available in EPUB and PDF format.
And I love the fact that you don't mind calling a spade and saying these are the apps that you need to look at. I think that is just so critical because the App Store is so vast, and you search for anything and you get a million things. And this at least gives people a place to go for at least some of the best accessibility apps. So
yeah, and I want to point out that those apps are not just ones that I've looked at and thought were awesome. I talked to a lot of people. I said before that the blindness community in particular, but there are other communities out there too, that they know which apps are good. People talk to each other. People go to the Apple Viz website and they look at the recommendations. So this is really based on a set of recommendations both from me and from the community at large. And I feel like I don't use all of these apps myself, but I have looked at them all. So I think it's a good cross section. And I think you can be reasonably assured that, first of all, that the app I suggest is good. And second of all, that it's fully accessible.
So go get the book, folks. Check it out. And again, just because you may not identify with this, there's still going to be stuff there for you. And if you
Absolutely.
don't identify, as Shelly said, people in your family do, or who knows, maybe in a couple of years you'll be aging into some things that this book will help you with. Shelly, you've been covering the Mac universe for so long, and I don't want people to think you're just an author. You are a podcaster, and you do so many other things. Give us a quick layout of all that and where they can find you.
Sure. I do a podcast called The Parallel at parallelpodcast.com. And the conceit of that show is it's a tech podcast with accessibility sprinkles. I get a couple of guests to talk about technology, whatever the topic might be. It might be gaming. It might be new Apple products. And then the hook is that one of those guests is usually in the mainstream community, and one of them is somebody from the accessibility community. But we don't just talk about accessibility. Sometimes we get around to it. Sometimes it takes a while. But we might spend 45 minutes talking about CES and accessibility. Doesn't come up till the end. So that was my goal, is so that the show will be interesting to people who are in accessibility and also people who know nothing about it and don't really think they want to listen to a show about accessibility. So come and check that out. Let's see what else. I am part of the MacCessibility Roundtable podcast, which is every 2 weeks. I can't even talk today. Every 2 weeks we do a show where we just kick around what's going on in Apple news. We did one this afternoon. Our next one will be in a month, actually, because of the Thanksgiving holiday coming up. But it's a great show if you want to hear different perspectives from Apple fans in the blindness community. Check that out. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm Shelly, Shelly, and we can chat about accessibility or not. Just any Mac topic will do. I'm always up for general purpose Mac conversation as well.
Yeah, I think we all are. I don't know
it's fun.
It is.
We like to play with our toys, and it's nice to be able to talk to other people about the toys we're playing with, isn't it?
Especially when they have some of the same toys, and
right.
And you're jealous of their toys, they're jealous of your toys, and it's
new MacBook. Let me talk to you about that.
Shelly, it's great to have you. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the 4th edition of this. 5th edition coming up, I'm sure.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Apple will tell me when the 5th edition is coming out, but my guess will be about a year from now. And I'm really proud of this 4th edition. I made some updates in the organization of the book, and I really tried to be responsive to the user feedback I got. So I think this is the best one yet. It's certainly the longest one yet. So 650 pages of accessibility. If that's what you want to read at bedtime, please feel free to come and buy the book.
Great. Well, we will definitely talk to you again. If it's not about accessibility, it'll be about toys.
Yay, toys!
Yes. Thanks, Shelly.
Thanks, Chuck.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Again, go check this out. If you don't think accessibility is for you, you might be surprised. And the best evidence that Shelly gave you of that is the inevitable articles that you see out there about 10 top secret hidden features, because that will give you maybe your entree into the world of accessibility. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com, bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.